Welcome to the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit, where articles come alive. You're listening to the audio version of our article. For the full text and an interactive experience, check out the link in the description below. Interact with any selection using our AI assistant to enhance your understanding. Let's explore.
Systematic coding in discourse analysis. Systematic coding in discourse analysis refers to the methodical process of categorizing and organizing data from spoken, written, or multimodal texts to identify patterns, themes, or structures within discourse. Coding is a key step in qualitative research, and in discourse analysis, it helps to break down large datasets into manageable units that reveal how language is used to convey meaning, power, identity, and ideology. This process is crucial for systematically analyzing the complexities of discourse and ensuring that the findings are grounded in the data. 1. The role of coding in discourse analysis. In discourse analysis, coding involves labeling segments of text, or other forms of data, to represent specific features of language use, such as thematic content, discursive strategies, or rhetorical devices. Systematic coding allows researchers to move from raw data to a deeper understanding of the linguistic patterns that underlie discourse. This approach helps in identifying how language constructs social realities, reflects cultural norms, and perpetuates or challenges power relations. Purpose of coding. The main purpose of coding in discourse analysis is to systematically organize the data to identify recurrent themes or ideas, explore discursive strategies such as framing, positioning, or metaphor use, uncover underlying ideologies or power dynamics in discourse, analyze how language is used to construct identities or reflect cultural practices. Example: in analyzing political speeches, coding might involve identifying how metaphors, e.g., war on poverty, are used to frame social issues, or how specific groups are positioned, e.g., citizens versus immigrants. Point 2. Types of coding in discourse analysis. There are several types of coding that researchers may use in discourse analysis, each serving a different function in breaking down and interpreting the data. These include open coding, axial coding, and selective coding. Open coding. Open coding is the initial phase of analysis, where researchers break down the data into discrete parts and assign labels or codes to each unit of meaning. This is typically a data-driven process, meaning that the codes emerge from the data itself rather than being imposed based on pre-existing categories. Open coding helps identify the broad range of themes, discursive patterns, or linguistic features present in the text. Example: a researcher analyzing interviews about climate change might use open coding to identify initial themes like environmental responsibility, economic cost, or personal sacrifice. Axial coding. After open coding, axial coding is used to explore relationships between the codes identified during the open coding phase. This step helps to connect different categories and themes, allowing the researcher to see how various parts of the discourse interact. Axial coding often involves identifying central phenomena and linking them to other aspects of the discourse, such as causes, consequences, or conditions. Example: in the climate change discourse, axial coding might reveal connections between the themes of economic cost and government responsibility, showing how participants link financial concerns to political accountability. Selective coding. Selective coding involves identifying the core categories or themes that are most central to the discourse. This final phase of coding focuses on refining the analysis by selecting the key discursive strategies or patterns that are most significant in answering the research questions. Selective coding often leads to the development of overarching themes or concepts that explain the main ideas emerging from the discourse. Example: in the analysis of climate change discourse, selective coding might identify sustainability as a moral duty as a core theme, linking various other sub-themes like personal responsibility and environmental justice. 3. Steps in systematic coding. Systematic coding in discourse analysis typically follows a structured process to ensure that the analysis is thorough, reliable, and grounded in the data. Below are the key steps involved. 1. Data familiarization. Before beginning the coding process, Researchers must become familiar with the data by reading or listening to the material multiple times. This step ensures that the researcher understands the overall context, content, and nuances of the discourse. Example: a researcher analyzing online discussions about immigration might read through hundreds of forum posts to get a sense of how people frame their arguments, the language they use, and the positions they take. Point 2. Generating initial codes. During the open coding phase, the researcher assigns labels to small units of the text, typically words, phrases, or sentences that appear significant or relevant to the research question. These codes should be specific and reflect what is happening in the data. Example: in a set of interviews about healthcare access, a researcher might code sections with labels like barriers to healthcare, doctor-patient communication, or financial concerns. 3. Reviewing and refining codes. Once the initial coding is complete, the researcher reviews the codes to check for overlap, consistency, and relevance. At this stage, redundant codes can be merged, and unclear codes can be refined or discarded. This step ensures that the coding system is clear and comprehensive. Example: if two codes, such as economic inequality and income disparity, seem to capture the same phenomenon, the researcher might combine them into a single code like financial inequality. 4. Organizing codes into categories. After refining the codes, the researcher organizes them into broader categories or themes that capture the relationships between different codes. This axial coding process helps to structure the data in a way that reveals the key patterns and interactions within the discourse. Example: in an analysis of workplace discourse, the researcher might group codes related to hierarchy, collaboration, and conflict under the broader category of power dynamics. 5. Identifying core themes. Selective coding involves identifying the most important categories that explain the overarching patterns in the discourse. These core themes provide insights into the main discursive strategies, ideologies, or social phenomena that the discourse constructs or challenges. Example: in a political discourse on healthcare reform, the core themes might include healthcare as a right versus healthcare as a commodity, with each theme reflecting different ideological positions. Point 4. Approaches to systematic coding in discourse analysis. There are different approaches to coding in discourse analysis, each shaped by the theoretical framework guiding the research. Some of the most common approaches include thematic analysis, critical discourse analysis, CDA, and conversation analysis. Thematic analysis. Thematic analysis is a flexible method for identifying, analyzing, and reporting patterns, themes, within data. In discourse analysis, this approach involves coding the data for recurring topics or ideas and then grouping these into themes that reflect the meanings in the discourse. Example: a thematic analysis of news articles about climate change might identify themes like economic impact, scientific consensus, and climate skepticism. Critical discourse analysis. CDA, critical discourse analysis, CDA, focuses on how discourse reflects, reinforces, or challenges power relations and ideologies. Coding in CDA often involves identifying how language is used to maintain dominance, marginalize groups, or promote specific ideologies. Example: in CDA of political speeches, coding might focus on how language positions certain groups as versus them, or how metaphors are used to naturalize neoliberal economic policies. Conversation analysis. Conversation analysis examines the structure and organization of talk and interactions. In this approach, coding involves identifying specific features of conversational structure, such as turn-taking, repairs, and topic shifts, to understand how meaning is negotiated in social interaction. Example: in a conversation analysis of customer service calls, coding might focus on how agents manage turn-taking and how they use language to maintain a polite, service-oriented tone while resolving conflicts. Point 5. Examples of systematic coding in discourse analysis. Example 1. Media representation of refugees. A researcher analyzing media discourse on refugees might use systematic coding to explore how different news outlets frame the issue. Open coding might identify themes such as security threat, humanitarian crisis, or economic burden. Axial coding could then reveal how these themes are linked to ideological positions, such as support for or opposition to immigration policies. Finally, selective coding might focus on core discursive strategies, such as dehumanization or victimization, that shape public perception. Example 2. Gender and language in workplace discourse. In a discourse analysis of workplace interactions, systematic coding could identify how gender affects communication styles. Open coding might reveal themes like assertiveness, collaboration, or conflict avoidance, which are then organized into broader categories related to gender norms and power dynamics. Selective coding would focus on the key strategies used by employees to navigate these dynamics, such as how women in leadership positions adjust their language to balance authority and likability. Example 3. Health discourse in online communities. A researcher analyzing health-related discourse in online forums might use coding to investigate how individuals talk about illness. Open coding could identify themes like self-diagnosis, support-seeking, and treatment options. Axial coding would then connect these themes to broader social phenomena, such as the role of peer support in managing chronic illness. Selective coding might focus on core narratives, such as how individuals frame their illness experiences in terms of empowerment or vulnerability. Conclusion. Systematic coding in discourse analysis is a structured approach that allows researchers to explore the rich, complex ways in which language constructs social realities, identities, and power dynamics. Through the careful application of open, axial, and selective coding, researchers can break down large datasets into manageable units, uncover patterns and themes, and develop a deeper understanding of how discourse functions in various contexts. Whether analyzing media representations, workplace interactions, or online communities, systematic coding is an essential tool for making sense of the intricacies of discourse. Frequently asked questions. What is systematic coding in discourse analysis? Systematic coding in discourse analysis refers to the methodical process of categorizing and organizing data from spoken, written, or multimodal texts to identify patterns, themes, or structures within discourse. This process involves labeling segments of text to represent specific features of language use, such as thematic content, discursive strategies, or rhetorical devices, allowing researchers to uncover how language conveys meaning, power, identity, and ideology. Why is coding important in discourse analysis? Coding is essential in discourse analysis because it systematically organizes data, making it possible to identify recurrent themes, discursive strategies, and underlying ideologies within discourse. By breaking down large datasets into manageable units, coding helps researchers explore how language constructs social realities, reflects cultural norms, and perpetuates or challenges power relations. What are the main purposes of coding in discourse analysis? The main purposes of coding in discourse analysis include identifying recurrent themes or ideas in the discourse, exploring discursive strategies like framing, positioning, or metaphor use, uncovering underlying ideologies or power dynamics, analyzing how language constructs identities or reflects cultural practices. Through coding, researchers can systematically dissect and interpret the complexities of discourse. What are the different types of coding used in discourse analysis? There are three primary types of coding in discourse analysis. Open coding. The initial phase where researchers label segments of the text to identify a broad range of themes or linguistic features. It is data-driven and involves breaking down the data into discrete parts. Axial coding. The process of exploring relationships between the codes identified during open coding, connecting different categories and themes to reveal how they interact. Selective coding. The final phase, focusing on identifying the core categories or themes central to the discourse, refining the analysis to explain the main ideas emerging from the data. What is the purpose of open coding in discourse analysis? Open coding serves as the first step in the coding process, where the researcher breaks down the data into smaller units and assigns labels or codes to each meaningful segment. The purpose is to identify a wide range of themes, patterns, or linguistic features within the data without any preconceived categories. This process allows the codes to emerge directly from the data, providing an initial overview of the discourse. How does axial coding differ from open coding? Axial coding differs from open coding in that it focuses on exploring the relationships between the codes identified during the open coding phase. While open coding breaks the data into smaller segments and assigns labels, Axial coding connects these codes to reveal patterns and interactions within the discourse. It often involves identifying central phenomena and linking them to causes, consequences, or conditions in the discourse. What is selective coding, and when is it used? Selective coding is the final phase of the coding process, where the researcher identifies the core categories or themes that are most central to the discourse. It involves refining the analysis by selecting the key discursive strategies or patterns that are significant in answering the research questions. Selective coding helps develop overarching themes or concepts that explain the main ideas emerging from the discourse. What are the key steps in systematic coding? The key steps in systematic coding include data familiarization, immersing in the data by reading or listening to it multiple times to understand the context and nuances. Generating initial codes, assigning labels to segments of the text during open coding to identify significant themes or features. Reviewing and refining codes, reviewing the codes for consistency and relevance, merging redundant codes, and refining the coding system. Organizing codes into categories, grouping the codes into broader categories or themes through axial coding to reveal patterns. Identifying core themes, using selective coding to identify the most important categories that explain the overarching patterns in the discourse. How does thematic analysis differ from critical discourse analysis, CDA? In coding, thematic analysis involves identifying and analyzing recurring topics or ideas within the data to reveal the themes in the discourse. It is a flexible method that focuses on coding the data for thematic content. Critical discourse analysis, CDA, on the other hand, emphasizes examining how discourse reflects, reinforces, or challenges power relations and ideologies. In CDA, coding involves identifying how language maintains dominance, marginalizes groups, or promotes specific ideologies, often with a focus on societal power structures. What is the role of conversation analysis in systematic coding? Conversation analysis focuses on the structure and organization of talk in social interactions. In systematic coding, conversation analysis involves identifying specific features of conversational structure, such as turn-taking, repairs, and topic shifts. The goal is to understand how meaning is negotiated in interactions. Coding in conversation analysis helps reveal how conversational elements contribute to the construction of social reality and interpersonal dynamics. Can you provide an example of systematic coding in media discourse analysis? In analyzing media discourse on refugees, systematic coding might involve open coding to identify themes such as security threat, humanitarian crisis, and economic burden. Axial coding could then explore how these themes are linked to ideological positions, like support for or opposition to immigration policies. Selective coding might focus on core discursive strategies, such as dehumanization or victimization, shaping public perception of refugees. How do researchers ensure the reliability of their coding process? Researchers ensure the reliability of their coding process by systematically reviewing and refining their codes to maintain consistency. This includes merging redundant codes, refining unclear codes, and ensuring that the coding system is comprehensive. Additionally, researchers may use multiple coders to independently code the data and then compare their findings to enhance reliability. Clear documentation of the coding process also contributes to transparency and reliability. How does coding help in uncovering power dynamics in discourse? Coding helps uncover power dynamics in discourse by systematically identifying how language is used to maintain dominance, marginalize certain groups, or promote specific ideologies. Through coding, researchers can highlight discursive strategies such as framing, positioning, or metaphors that reveal underlying power relations. For example, in political discourse, coding might reveal how language constructs an us versus them dichotomy, reinforcing power imbalances.